Welcome back to another custom card review. This time around, you guys made some Castle Nathria themed cards. So some characters you know from Nathria. We got some location action infused cards and more, like this spin on Huntmaster Erelon. I think this was submitted before the official reveal for Erelon, for the record. But it comes from Magic Milk, a 3-mana 3/3, and it reads, after a friendly beast dies, give all beasts in your deck +1/+1. And I love this card because it supports infuse style strategies without specifically being an infused card. And I do feel like infuse might need that extra help to make it feel worthwhile. So for instance, you play Erelon down on board, you run in some 1/1s with Erelon that were there before, maybe some rush 1/1s, whatever it might be, and suddenly you're buffing your entire deck +3/+3. And used to, that would have really scared me. Those Keleseth style effects seemed so dang powerful. Nowadays, deck buffs like that aren't quite as intimidating as they used to be, and this is one that would demand some follow-up, some onboard support for it, and it would cost a fair bit of mana in that case very often. You'd have to have this plus some rush minions maybe to go with it to really feel good, because it does demand being on board for that. But I still love the way that plays into an infused strategy. I'm not only rewarding my infused cards, but maybe if I don't have good infused stuff in hand or it's not lining up perfectly, this is still a way to invest and make all of those small little token minions better throughout the course of the game by scaling up their stats from a base level as well. So taking a different angle and a different approach to the same sort of strategy is a cool way to support a keyword that might still need a little bit of help, many of us fear. So next up here is Jury Duty from Nobody, and this card has absolutely wonderful flavor. It feels just so perfect from a flavor design standpoint. It's a Paladin secret, and it reads, after a friendly minion dies, draw 2 minions. So there's a murder on board. A minion has been killed, and then 2 minions are summoned for jury duty, and they join your hand to serve on the jury. And I just love that from a flavor standpoint. It's like simple, but it's so clean. It fits so darn well. Now, from a power level standpoint, this does worry me a little bit. That's a very efficient, specific sort of card draw that plays really well into Paladin with things like hand buffs. Even the secret itself, like, it punishes your opponent for killing minions, right? So they may say, okay, look, I'm going to leave that 1/1 on board. I'm not going to kill that Silverhand recruit so that they don't draw 2 cards. Even that sort of plays well into Paladin, because then you have minions that you can use buffs on and follow up there. So this might just be too strong as far as I'm concerned, but maybe you could just draw 1 minion getting summoned for jury duty, and it might still feel like a relevant little way to get some secret cycling and maybe proc some secret synergies along the way. But all the same, I just love the design of this card so much. If you think it's fine from a power level standpoint, let me know in the comments, because this feels like it could otherwise be absolutely a very real card. Next up here, we have Rafam the Collector from Edward, a different spin here on Rafam. I think this one again was probably submitted prior to Rafam's reveal, but I don't care. I like taking different looks at these characters, and this one has a lot of cool stuff going on. It's a 6-mana 3/8. It reads, whenever you draw a card, add a random artifact of Rafam into your hand instead. So as opposed to getting your normal card drawn, you're going to get one of these artifacts, and some of these are very powerful. Cloak of the Dark Prince is a 4-mana spell. Summon 2 5/5 shadows with Taunt and Rush, so some nice board build there. Gauntlet of Origination seems insane. A 3-mana 3/2 weapon. Your hero is immune while attacking, and Battle Cry. Your next spell costs 0. I don't know if we needed that, but that would be a great way to fuel additional card draw to set up more of these crazy plays. Enchanted Strips would be a 2-mana spell. Increase your maximum hand size by 2 this turn and draw 2 cards. They cost 2 less. Again, ways to draw more stuff. Now, the artifacts that you got instead would not be discounted by this, but still a way to get more artifacts if needed. And then finally, the Ace, a 1-mana card you can have up your sleeve that reads, take control of an enemy minion, set its attack and health to 3. So a very powerful mind control effect. It might debuff minions, but still going to be well worth it for 1 mana to just completely rip something of your opponents. So I do think these are pretty dang powerful, obviously, each of them in a vacuum. There is this like 6-mana overhead for Rafam itself. You may not be able to draw a ton of cards or squeeze an artifact into the same turn, so that might help counterbalance this from a power level standpoint, where you have to take kind of a downturn for Rafam in exchange for maybe, you know, a few good cards in hand that then blow up later. It's funny, you know, with the new Imp card draw card we got, Impending Catastrophe, that's so efficient, can draw like 6 or 7 cards for 2 mana. That would actually play really nicely with this version of Ratham, as well, of course, as the real Imp King Ratham. So it's kind of funny how well that lined up. But Warlock as a class, historically, of course, very good at card draw anyway. So I would probably tweak some numbers here and there, lower some power levels on some of these, but I really like this idea of Ratham having all these different artifacts you get to unlock and play with. Kind of harkens back to the original League of Explorers Ratham, but I think in a much more fun and much more competitive way than that card, which always felt very, very slow. Next up here is a cool location counter card of sorts from Synth and Lasers, a 2-mana Hunter secret. When your opponent plays a location, take control of it. And it's the high ground advantage, which that is just, again, fantastic flavor. You've got this hunter, you know, up on the high ground, scoping out any locations. Your opponent plays the location, and now they've taken control of it, right? They're basically sniping that location from afar, and now you get to control that location instead. And it's a cool little way to answer and counter a location. Now, at this point in Hearthstone, you know, locations, we've only got 1 for each class. I don't know how pervasive they're really going to be in the meta. Probably not. This probably wouldn't feel like a really compelling card to run at the moment, but somewhere in the future, particularly if there were decks that were really reliant on locations that they would naturally play on curve after this, you could see a secret like this being good. Maybe even now with something like Vile Fiend Library, getting this out ahead of the library, just completely denying your opponent that ability to scale off that location for their imps, might be a really cool way to do that. And I think cards like this should definitely exist. And because this one delivered so well on flavor and addressed the new card type introduced to this expansion, it seemed like a very natural fit for this video. Before we move on to our next card, I'd like to talk about our sponsor for this video. It's Keeps. Yeah, if you didn't know, 2 out of 3 guys will experience some form of male pattern baldness by the time they're 35 years old. And with Keeps, the good news is you can get your hair loss prescription sent right to your door. You don't have to go to an awkward doctor visit or hit the pharmacy up. They'll send it right to you, making it super easy and convenient. So if you've noticed you're losing your hair, it's time to do something about it. For a limited time, you can visit keeps.com/Regis for 50% off your first order. Next up is a totally busted card. I mean, this is way too strong, I think, but it's really cool. And if this is true, this text line that was included with the submission, I love cards like this that deliver so well on the flavor and tell a really cool story based in the Shadowlands. So this is Rindle the Mistermind from Astromixin. It's a 3-mana 2/4. It's a neutral legendary. Battle cry, add a coin to your hand. So that's already actually a pretty good effect, I think. Sometimes that's just very useful to have coins to cheat stuff out, and you're not really sacrificing too much. Very cheap way to do that. With no downside like the Mailbox Dancer, for instance. And also, though, this is where it gets kind of crazy. Endlessly Infused to add 1 more. So this would be a way to get a lot of coins added to your hand, potentially, for just 3 mana. And obviously, there are a handful of decks that could totally abuse that, whether that's cheating out big stuff or like Rogue now with these crazy Draka style plays where you want to play a bunch of cards in a single turn, miracle things with auctioneers. Like, clearly that's just way too good. It would need to be like Infuse 5 or something maybe to even feel okay to me. But the storyline, let's read this if you haven't already read it. Rindle was the repair vendor in the Castle Nathria raid. During the expansion, he received an ever-growing pile of gold, and in a later zone began handing it out to free players for defeating mobs. So the story on this is so perfect because people would raid in Castle Nathria, they would die, which damages your equipment. Then as they died, they would have to get their equipment repaired, feeding gold to Rindle the Mistermind. So the deaths of the raiders gave this guy extra gold, and endlessly infusing the deaths of your minion are making sure this guy has a lot of extra gold to give you. So it's this really cool storyline. I love the flavor. The little bonus text here really sold me on this one for sure. And obviously way too good. Would have to be far more expensive or have a higher infuse cap, I think, for this to be a healthy card at all. But man, what a home run flavor delivery. Once again, some really cool stories in this set of cards so far. So next up here we have Sludge Fist, and this is a really popular character to submit. I think this is one of the few raid bosses in Castle Nathria that didn't show up in the expansion already, and I really like the spin on it from Faroon. It's an 8-mana 8/8 legendary minion. Battlecry, destroy the minion across from this and its position on the board for the rest of the game. So I really like the aspect here that it's not just totally random minion destruction like we see for a lot of these big destroy a thing sorts of cards. You can manipulate this a little bit, which I think that's a nice little strategic bonus. Makes you think a little bit and work a little bit on both sides for positioning on this guy. And then there's also this cool aspect of destroying the position on board, which in most game states wouldn't matter too much if your opponent just loses one position. Very rarely are people going 7 wide, and that would be a big limitation for them. But I love cards like this where if you concoct some crazy shenanigan, you're able to play a bunch of these in a game via some copying mechanism, whatever it is, and being able to lock out 3 of your opponent's spots, 5, maybe even all 7 in some super crazy scenario. That's always fun to have these like chase kind of legendaries where they're probably not going to work very well and often. They may not get played much, but it gives people ways to experiment and do crazy things. You would never want a card like that to be a significant part of the meta because it could be really frustrating, but that 1 in a million chance to do something wild, I think that's really fun. And I think this card would be okay at its base level, a solid option, and then potentially really, really fun when you were able to do crazy things with it. So that is always a card I would welcome in Hearthstone. Next up here is a Rogue Secret with the introduction of Rogue Secrets once again. This one's, again, a fantastic flavor card. It's from River of Molecules, 2-mana spell, swap the bodies. If a friendly minion would die, swap it with a Death Rattle minion in your hand and it dies instead. So this is so cool for this Death Rattle Rogue stuff we've seen teased a lot. This is a way to make sure that you're going to get some Death Rattles into play. Could even be a really big Death Rattle that you cheat out effectively with Swap the Bodies, which might be the one way this card is getting broken if you only have like one big 10-mana Death Rattle and that's the only thing. So maybe there would need to be some kind of limitation here on what kind of Death Rattle, like, you know, Death Rattle minion that costs 4 or less or something, just to put a bit of a cap here on what could be summoned into play. But beyond that, it's actually got some cool rogue stuff too. It's really sort of a bounce effect mixed in here as well, because you could play a battle cry minion, reap the benefit of that battle cry, then have that minion swapped back into your hand, and then you get to replay your battle cry minion again. So it's doing this bounce of stuff for rogue. It's doing this Death Rattle stuff for rogue, fusing those two worlds together in a really fun way. Probably, again, a little imbalanced in this case, but I love the flavor. Fantastic fit again for Castle Nathria, and a really nice design fit for the class as well. With a few tweaks, I think this would be a very, very fun and effective secret for sure. So next up is Accusation. So next up is a spicy spell. This is Accusation from Chori, an 8-mana mage spell, which we desperately need in standard, by the way. We're currently missing an 8-mana spell for Arcane Brilliance. And it reads, choose a minion, cast random spells until it dies. And so many people right now are groaning, oh no, this is the worst. Don't do this to us. Please don't ever print a card like this. And I hear you, but I really like this take on random spell casting. Right now, all the random spell cards we have in Hearthstone are these like big, high, you know, Rune of the Archmage and Yogg's Puzzle Box, all these. They have imposed limits on them, you know, up to 20 mana worth of spells, cast 10 random spells. And that's cool, but I like that this shifts it to a results-based limit. It still has a limit, but this result has to occur. The minion has to die before it stops. And I think that changes it in some really interesting ways. Number one, it could go absolutely bonkers and haywire, and it could take like 30 spells to kill a minion, for instance. That is a really interesting thing that can happen, because that can really backfire. Usually, you don't want too many spells on these effects, because you'll end up drawing 25 cards and fatiguing yourself out if you just cast a bunch of random card draw spells in the middle, right? So there are some risks when it goes too long for these sorts of effects. There's a sweet spot typically. But it could also kind of do nothing. It might just serve as like a removal spell, and it's just the minion dies almost immediately, right? And then boom, you're good to go. And I think that's in some ways a better risk reward position. There's a lot higher risk with this sort of card, but also a guaranteed reward. So it's both more consistent and more inconsistent. Maybe starting to sound like a crazy person a little bit, but I think I like that a little bit better, because the player knows what they're going to get out of it, but also, you know, they take on a ton more risk. Again, actually, this card's fantastic flavor. It's just like, I'm accusing you of this. I'm going to throw everything at you until it sticks, basically. Kind of that like witch hunt vibe almost, or you see here the pitchfork style of approach of an accusation. Excellent flavor. I don't know if I convinced myself about the mechanics or not, but a really nifty card to think about in any case. So finally here we have the Nathrian Guard from Minivat, a 3-mana 2/5 neutral infuse minion, and I have to say this is one of my favorite infuse designs I've seen of all infuse, real and otherwise, because it feels really accessible, really achievable, but still not too crazy powerful at its end game. I think a lot of the infuse designs so far feel very feast or famine, where the base level of the card, you're like, ugh, not very excited about this, and then it takes a lot of work and you know, a fixed number to make it feel good. So you got to go from 0 to 5 infused, for instance, to feel worth it. Whereas this, with the incremental gains here from infuse 1 to 2 to 3, gaining taunt and then lifesteal and divine shield, it feels so much of a smoother gradient here towards a playable card. You're not like totally distraught probably to play a 2/5 with taunt. Sometimes that will feel okay. And then if you get lifesteal, it's like, oh man, great. That's a great bonus for a single infuse. And then divine shield's another great bonus for a single infuse. And this card starts to power up really effectively. It might honestly be a little too good at infuse 3, but that's okay. We're fine with that. If power levels are a little high, that's all right. And I think I like that because it's less make or break. It's less frustrating to say, oh my god, I'm 1 infused minion short of getting to infuse 5 or whatever it is on other cards, and I just don't have a good way to do that, and I need to play this now, so it's totally garbage. And I'm gonna have to play this garbage version of the card as opposed to one that's like sort of okay. And we did see this with the Hunter Legendary, the real one, and that's a great step in that direction, but it still feels like it has pretty big gaps, and it's, you know, pretty late game card, and it's still going to take a lot of work to get it fully upgraded. I wish more infused cards looked a little bit like this, with this sort of linear increase over time to make a card feel good at various stages, instead of feeling frustrating when it whiffs. I think I like this brand of infuse pretty dang well, and I would certainly welcome this card to a lot of decks. Well, there you go. That wraps it up for this custom card video. If you want to submit your cards for next time, check the link down there in the description for the prompt for the next video and the submission form to get your cards in. Thanks as always for making so many cool cards to talk about. Thanks much for watching this video, and until next time, game on.